Always two there are, a master and an apprentice.
Hey Force fans, welcome back to a special edition of the Jedi Force Podcast. And here we have Master and Apprentice, only two there are, as we give you a little bit of our insights to some of what's been going on in AHSOKA. There's been so much going on YouTube and the internet about the latest episodes of AHSOKA. Everybody's talking about it. Every podcast is talking about it. So we thought we might need to jump in. So Padawan Bentley and I decided we're going to share some of our thoughts about AHSOKA for a few minutes with you good fans. And we hope that everyone's seen it because there will be spoilers. So the rest of the Force crew is away this week. So look forward to seeing them next time when we come back with a full look at AHSOKA. But Bentley, let's start. Of course, you saw the episode, and what are your initial thoughts about it?
It was amazing. Awesome.
So all the adjectives.
Awesome. Great. Amazing. Perfecto.
What is it that you particularly liked about it? Because I think there are some key elements in, especially these last couple of episodes, that really just screamed Star Wars to us. But there's also a particular aspect of these AHSOKA shows that have really played upon, say, our fandom from, the Clone Wars, Rebels, a lot of events leading up to. And some people might say, well, it's just fan service. But I think they're telling a really good story here. And I'll be honest with you, with this last episode where she goes into the world between worlds and meets up with Anakin, I'll admit it was cool. The story was awesome. But boy, I'm scratching my head on a few things. I can't say that I understand everything that took place, but I think that's what's great about Star Wars is that we don't have to have all the answers spelled out for us. I think that they can mean, various things to various people. So what are some of the things that you gained from it that you think people might have, some differing opinions on?
Well, it teaches a good lesson for Ahsoka.
Mm-hmm.
Like she needed to learn. She needed to realize that it's not all about peace. You gotta fight for peace. And she didn't understand that.
Sure.
And she didn't want to become a weapon, as she says, as a younger, or in one of her visions.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it was just a really good episode with the message that Anakin was trying to teach Ahsoka and everything.
And you're familiar with the Clone Wars, aren't you?
Oh yeah,
especially some of the early. Okay. In those early episodes when we were first introduced to AHSOKA, and of course, if you saw, if the folks out there saw AHSOKA, but they weren't making the connections, of course, this all goes back to the Clone War days when Anakin was given AHSOKA as his Padawan. He was supposed to train her, and really it was a test for him. She already had a lot of, things together. And in those first few episodes, he calls her Snips, and he says, don't get snippy. And she had a bit of an attitude, but she was a little bit more gung-ho and out there. But the flashbacks, well, if you want to call them that, they weren't really flashbacks. They were more her visions. I think you said that a minute ago. But they were more like her adult mind reasoning what she was dealing with as a teenager. And in light of that, she's looking around going, wow, this is what we were doing. This is what we were involved in. And it was a lot more intense than I think she realized when it was really happening. Because, the behind the scenes, of some of that is that, in those visions that she put herself into, the younger years, or we could say Anakin did, or probably more like the Force. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. I think she might be just, realizing what a devastating impact that it had on the rest of her life, because those events defined who she became. And who she became at least in the first, say, 4 episodes of Ahsoka, a lot of people complain that she's a little more stoic. She doesn't seem to be real happy. But, I think that's exactly the point, is that she's come to a point where it's like, this again, got to go after Thrawn, got to save the galaxy again. It's like, come on, man.
No matter how many times you save the world, it always manages to get back in jeopardy again. I mean, sometimes I just want it to stay saved, for a little bit. I feel like the maid. I just cleaned up this mess. Can we keep it clean for 10 minutes?
Yeah, you get to that point. Wait,
Please?
don't get up there.
And I think that's kind of where Ahsoka was in her mind in these first few episodes. But I think what we see at the end of this last episode, called Shadow Warrior, episode 5, is she's regained a little bit of that twinkle in her eye. And she's looking forward to the adventure ahead. And that's the way that she's looking at it. But, and then there are a lot of things that we could talk about in regard to these episodes. We could talk about the basics, which I think we would understand. The stuff with the ships was cool. We have the ghost brought back, in live action. We saw that in Rebels, which was just like a minuscule of a second. You saw it landing, or have landed at Yavin 4 in one of the scenes. You got to look real closely in the corner of the screen. Then you see it in flight over Scarif, and that's from Rogue One. I said Rebels, but I meant Rogue One. And that was the only time that we saw it in live action along with Chopper. And then, of course, we have examples like Carson Teva, who's kind of given us, I think, our perspective, or a regular person's perspective of things like the Force and all, because you got Huyang, who's talking about Jason being the son not only of Hera, but of Kanan Jarrus, who was a Jedi, and how he is attuned to the Force. He just comes right out. And we've already seen it in the fact that Jason's looking over the cliff, and he's sensing the things going on in the Force. And I want to talk about that in just a minute, because I think it has some insight as to what was happening with Ahsoka. But getting back to the point about Carson's comment, he just kind of looks at the situation and he goes, okay, like whatever, man. Like he doesn't understand it, but he's just accepting it as just another weird thing that he sees on his job.
This is going off topic, but you know what I really, really would love to see? Kanan in the Ahsoka series.
Yeah. I mean, a flashback or something like that. That would be cool.
So I don't really. I guess Hera's not really struggling with anything right now, but Ahsoka was. So maybe they would put Kanan would appear to Hera or something like that, which that would be super cool. Because I would love.
If the story was more about Hera, then but I think, especially since we only have 3 episodes to go, they're really going to have to focus on Ahsoka, and of course, Thrawn and Ezra. And I think if it's not really Hera's story, she's more of a supporting thing. I will say this though, Kanan is in the show. Did you know that? Yeah, check this out. So a lot of people didn't realize that, of course, in the cockpit of the Ghost, there is a picture on the side of one of the instrument panels, and you can barely make it out. It's a little fuzzy, but it's supposed to be a picture of Kanan. You know how all the old pilots used to do, put a picture of their loved one, right there on the dashboard, and they'd be able to look at him. So he's represented in there.
Well, what I really liked is the clones. That was amazing. We heard and saw Captain Rex, and when I saw him for the first time, I'm like, because that's the first time we ever see him in live action, right?
I mean, right? Yes and no. Of course, we saw the clones in live action. Well, I guess when you talk about Rex himself, yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
I don't remember Rex being in Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith, we were introduced to more of their individual personalities, like Cody. Okay. He was the one that worked with Obi-Wan, and of course, when Order 66 was given, he was the one that ordered the firing upon Obi-Wan. So Rex, I'm guessing, well, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure he was introduced in the Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an interesting observation, is that somebody noted that the clones' armor, this is the first time we've seen it in real life. And the reason that he said that is because all the clone armor in Revenge of the Sith was computer generated, CGI. And so
you can tell.
I'm pretty sure the general consensus is that there wasn't any in real life IRL computer talk mock-ups done of the clone armor in the movies. So this might be the first time we actually see. No, I'm going to take that back, because we did see some real clone armor worn by Tamora Morrison in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. You remember the old clone that he helped on the side of the road, gave him a little money?
That was Rex, wasn't it?
Huh?
That was Rex, wasn't it?
No, they confirmed that it's not, but a lot of us thought maybe so. But we know that Rex
not sounded, because they all have the same voice, though.
Right. But it was the actual actor.
It looked like him.
Yeah, it was Tamora Morrison, Boba Fett.
The type of armor he had on, his helmet. I mean, how is that not Rex? I mean,
well, because we know that Rex is in Rebels. And this is like Obi-Wan Kenobi is about 10 years before A New Hope. So that makes Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I'm talking about the series, the limited series we recently saw on Disney. That makes it about 5 years before Rebels. Because if I'm not mistaken, Rebels takes place 5 years, or at least begins 5 years before A New Hope. So that soldier, we already know that Rex shows up in Rebels. And, he's older, he's bald, he's got the gray beard. And I doubt that he would have transformed that much in a 5-year period. So, yeah, I think it's been confirmed that it's not actually Rex. It's just a clone soldier in need. And even though it was just a bit part in the Star Wars universe, it certainly spoke to a greater problem that we do have in our world, where sometimes those that fight for our freedoms end up becoming, kind of cast to the side. And I think that's what's kind of indicated about that clone. But then there's a whole other layer to it, and the fact that the clones, turned against the Jedi. But we all know that they did not personally make those choices, that it was due to the inhibitor chip that the Emperor obviously had maliciously arranged through the Comenians. Camoenians.
Yeah, I always forget it too.
Those people from Camonia. Come on. Well, we got a blooper reel there, don't we? The cloners.
These are Camino ones. Keep to themselves. They're cloners.
Now, that clone, he had to have had his chip removed, wouldn't he? Because I don't think he would be like that. Because they couldn't really make their own choices when they turned evil.
Yeah. I don't know that there's been anything established as far as their later years. We know that Rex and his closest crew, removed the chips. And in fact, it was AHSOKA that removed Rex's chip. And they addressed that in the last season of the Clone Wars. Did you get to see the last season?
Yes.
We went like for, I don't know, 6 years or something.
The last episode, I cried at the end because it was so emotional. Because
It was
Ahsoka
powerful.
sits there and she's like, wow.
It was the perfect ending. And the
And
way that they
she
tied
dropped
it
her
all.
lightsaber.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
She drops her lightsabers.
Hmm.
And 10 years later, Anakin, Darth Vader, walks in that same spot
Yeah.
and looks down to sees the lightsabers.
Yeah, that's powerful.
You know, I wonder what he thought.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, that brings us back to Anakin, because in this last episode of Ahsoka, we pretty much get what we've always been wanting. Now we got some Anakin in Obi-Wan Kenobi. I loved what they did with, him and Obi-Wan. The flashbacks were cool, totally necessary. I don't know, but seeing Anakin in the suit, being Darth Vader, doing Darth Vader stuff, it was just perfect. Because I always knew, even when I was younger, all I had seen was, the first movie, and then you got The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And we went for, a couple of decades before we got, anything else, Star Wars wise and on the screen. We always kind of imagined, there had to be more. There was more about Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, than we had seen. And even when the prequels came out, I always believed that there were more and that there was room for them to have encountered one another during those times. And I love how the Clone Wars and Rebels brought elements of that, like with when Vader was introduced and he's fighting Ahsoka, when they meet and she learns that he is Anakin. I mean, that's powerful stuff. And then you have Anakin showing up in his, I'm going to say, around, Revenge of the Sith kind of look. And standing there talking with Ahsoka. Now, of course, just to back up a little bit, Balin Skull, who wasn't in this last episode, but we know that he defeated Ahsoka and, knocked her off the cliff. She somehow ends up in the world between worlds. We know that in reality, she's in the water. That's where they find her in the end. But during this time, it's like, well, how did she get there? Now, if we want to think linear about these things, then we're trying to be like, well, is there a portal that she goes through? We only have one, I think, linear view of the world between worlds. And that's what we saw in Rebels. And as brief as that was, when Ezra came through a portal, which he opened through his force powers, he pulls Ahsoka to safety when she was battling Darth Vader 2 years earlier. And then they kind of, go their separate ways. That's just one aspect. What we learned from this episode is that there's so much more to the world between worlds than we understand. Really, anything goes. So here's my question that, and I think I'm pretty satisfied with my particular view on this, but did she go back in time? Is she just having a vision? Or is this the Force trying to teach her a lesson through her memories of Anakin? Or is it Anakin himself trying to teach her a lesson through the Force? Is he a Force ghost per se?
I think it's Anakin.
Hmm?
Personally, it would make more sense to be Anakin. And it would make it better because it's actually him. Like Luke, when he first became a Jedi, Obi-Wan, he died. Well, he just perished, basically.
Yeah, that's a
he didn't really die, he just
yeah, we
perished.
can't really say Darth Vader killed him because it's like when he took that swing, he just disappeared. Jeez. That's but so did Luke. And and again, I think that's up to interpretation, to how we see it. So I'd like to think, yeah, Darth Vader didn't defeat Obi-Wan. But anyway, back to your point.
Like Luke, he had to have someone to teach him. And Yoda was he wasn't gonna live much longer. So someone had to teach him. And so Obi-Wan comes to him through the Force and uses his Force ghost abilities.
Well, you know what? That's what, and you bring up a good point because, that's what I think really shows the power of Luke Skywalker in the fact that a lot of what he learned, you could say he learned on his own. Yes, he had the influence of Force Ghost, Obi-Wan, but we don't really see Obi-Wan putting him through the paces, of particular training aspects. That was very limited, in the first movie. Yoda, put him through some training things there on Dagobah, and we don't know exactly how long they were there. It might be documented somewhere in a book or whatever, but I personally don't know. What I do know is that a lot of the things that Luke learned, he learned on the job. But here's the thing. Do you remember the scene in Empire Strikes Back when Luke goes down into the tree and he encounters what he thought was Vader, and they have a couple swings at each other, and of course he takes his head off, and then he sees himself in the Vader helmet. And I think that's telling in regard to what we see in Ahsoka in some of the things that she's experienced. But she's going back to her early memories. And in fact, I don't think it's just Anakin taking her to certain scenes in her past to teach her a lesson, but he's also giving insight as to what he became, which she already knows because she discovered that in Rebels. But here's the thing. There's that one scene where they end up on Mandalore. And Anakin actually says, I don't remember this battle. And she says, this is the Siege of Mandalore, because she was there, if you remember, and of course, helping Bo-Katan, retake the planet and so on. Anakin wasn't there. So here he is experiencing something new. So there's all kinds of Force stuff going on here that I think is also being created in Ahsoka's, reasoning in her own mind. But let me just say this. I think they're taking it all over the place because it's not just a vision. It's not just her imagination. And one reason I want to get back to Jason. Jason standing over the cliff. And what does he hear? Remember?
Here's the lightsabers.
He hears the lightsaber battle between her and Anakin. And so he's attuned to the Force. He's not just reading her mind. So I don't think we have to come up with a conclusion, as to how that took place, except the lesson learned. And I think it's important in life. We're so busy sometimes to point out how point A goes with point B that we forget what it all means. And I think sometimes we do that with Star Wars. We do that with real life. We do that with religion. And we shouldn't. We should look at the bigger picture to say, what do we need to do? What are the lessons we need to learn? How can I apply this to my life so that I can be, a better person? I can be happier in my journey. And, I can see, what the end of the road is supposed to be about, and not just living in the past. But we might have to do a little bit more of a deeper analysis of her experience in the world between worlds at some point. Okay, so I'm looking forward to seeing what becomes of other characters, and I don't know if we'll see them in this series or maybe a future series down the road, but they've really opened the door for Jason and to maybe, be a part of that Force future, and maybe events that eventually lead to, unfortunately, you've got, at this time in history, in the history of the show as it's happening now, you've got Luke out there, building his Jedi school. And he's already tried to train Grogu, as we know. And at this particular time period, because it's all in the same time period as The Mandalorian, you got Grogu out there with the Mando. You got Jason that might actually attend that school. Will he ever know Kylo Ren? Because at this point in time, Kylo is probably a very young boy. And so he could be out there experiencing some things in the Force as well. I don't know if we'll ever get that story, but it'd be interesting, I think. It's interesting to know that all that stuff is happening somewhere. Well, there's a lot more that we could say about Ahsoka, and we will be sharing more with you Force fans a little bit later on as we talk about Ahsoka once the series wraps up. We've got about 3 more episodes to go, And then we kind of want to come back with the whole Force crew so that we can talk about what we love, about Ahsoka, maybe where the story ended, where it's going to go. I mean, there's just all going to be all kinds of things. I think we're going to end on some cliffhangers, that's for sure. So looking forward to seeing what comes. And people say, this is what Star Wars is. And honestly, I've liked everything for the most part that Star Wars has given to us in the past few years. Between Mandalorian, of course, we haven't even talked about The Bad Batch, which is an awesome series in the style of Clone Wars. And it just gives so much little bits and pieces of insight to the Star Wars universe. And of course, we had Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Mandalorian is probably my favorite of all of them, which tries to tie in a lot of things. It brought back Boba Fett for us. So whether or not you hear fans saying they like it or they didn't like it, just remember, we live in an age right now where we get to enjoy Star Wars. So I'm real happy for it. Bentley, it's good hanging out with you, man. It's great to hear some of your insights about this Star Wars universe. You kind of make me feel like a kid again. But I just look at myself as an old Jedi master, I guess, and trying to train a young Padawan. So you'll be a Jedi Knight before you know it. And we'll have a big celebration right here on Jedi Force Podcast. So you guys tune in next time. We're going to throw out a few tidbits, a few reviews for you. Go back and check out Jedi Bentley's review of Obi-Wan Kenobi's Starfighter, and that's on our YouTube channel as well. So we're going to be putting a lot more content out for you to enjoy. A few little 2 to 5 minute videos that are a little bit easier to digest than some of our regular episodes. And then we'll get back to our regular episodes with the whole crew. And so we'll see you next time on the Jedi Force Podcast. Come on, Camoanians. Come on, Camoanian.
Yeah, I always forget it too.
Those people from Camonia. Come on. Well, we got a blooper reel there, don't we?